Let's talk about Split Fiction, something that you, I think, are about maybe halfway through. I'm maybe an hour and a bit through, very much a sort of review in progress / on your side and / first impressions on my side. But thoughts so far, how are you getting on?
Yeah, I'm loving it, Scott. You know, I was one of those people who kind of missed out a little bit on It Takes Two. I played it for about 5 hours and then just for whatever reason...
That game was insanely long.
Put it down and never got back to it. However, Split Fiction, on the other hand, I can't stop playing. I am loving it. Maybe it's just aesthetically a little bit more up my street. If you don't know, if you've been living under a rock, Split Fiction's gimmick is that you're playing as two characters. It's a co-op game like It Takes Two, and you're playing essentially these two characters that are writers, and their writing style and preferred genre of choice is either fantasy or science fiction. So the levels are either science fiction based or fantasy based, and you're jumping through their various different stories. And that split, no pun intended, hey, is just aesthetically pleasing to my eyes, Scott. Right. And I find that for me personally, even though I loved the experimentation and the imagination of It Takes Two, taking, shrinking down the characters, putting them in a garden shed and using everyday items and making them magical and fantastical, I like this split a little bit more. I feel like the creators here have gone absolutely wild with it, with the various scenarios that they're bringing to the table. I wondered if it was going to be a little bit one note on both sides, a bit science fiction 101, a bit fantasy 101. And while it starts in that realm, it definitely does complicate things and adds new wrinkles later on down the line. And it constantly is surprising me with every new level and idea that it introduces. But ultimately, it's just that kind of gameplay first mentality of you and whoever you're playing with will always have something fun and new to be interacting with, a new mechanic. And the best part of the game, obviously, is that you have to work together and utilize those different mechanics that you're each using together to get through the levels, which makes for some frustrating moments, but also a lot of hilarious moments.
I want to touch on the fact that, like Joseph Fares has quickly made a name for himself in the co-op space. It is a space in gaming that isn't really occupied at all. Like the idea of split screen gaming just kind of went away, but it wasn't like... I mean, obviously, there would have been so much test data on the industry sites, and well, people don't play split-screen multiplayer anymore. Most people play online, so we'll just fade those modes out. I remember when Halo stopped having split-screen, and that was like a big deal. But it feels like Joseph Fares has got back in there and said, nah, this is a cool way of playing a game. What if we design a whole set of systems around communication and working with each other and whatever? And that obviously blew up so much with It Takes Two. Now, you could argue some of that is because of the timing, like it was 2022 or whatever. It was just after the worst of the pandemic. Maybe people were staying inside a bit more or whatever. But either way, it really, really worked. And it massively put him on the map all over again. Like, I feel like that happened with Brothers in A Way Out. But that's my other thing, is that I really appreciate what Fares brings to the table as, like, his mentality towards video games. Like, when he cites the likes of Zelda and Mario and Nintendo stuff as, like, influence, he's, like, do such a good job of modernizing the immediacy of, like, a Nintendo title or whatever. And it's one of those things where I feel like, obviously, Hazelight have been going for a while, but this thing plays so well.
Yeah,
it feels like it's up there with like an Astro Bot or, like something that Nintendo have done, like a 3D Mario or whatever. Like, it is super responsive, super immediate. And then you get to all the, like, I don't know, the Willy Wonka style, he's curating this adventure for you stuff, where like every 5 minutes there's a new mechanic where it's like you have to like fundamentally work with the other person to open a level up together or do a little stealth sequence or whatever it is.
When I played It Takes Two for the first time, I was impressed of how much of a step up it was compared to A Way Out, which I really enjoyed, but gameplay-wise, it felt like an indie game that was working within its restrictions and budgetary restrictions and resource restrictions and whatnot. And then you got It Takes Two, which did play really well. In my head, I was always thinking, this is great for an indie game, for a smaller game. I play Split Fiction, and I just think, this is just great. This is just plays well. It's responsive. Like you said, all of the different ideas are implemented with a level of finesse and polish that I expect of like the big names in the platforming game, like Astro Bot or a Mario or what have you. And it's that sort of just quality that this game has that was in It Takes Two, but is all over this one gameplay-wise. It is just so smooth and so responsive and just fundamentally fun to play. I often judge a game by its jump button, Scott Tilford, and this has a great jump button. It's got a great dash button. It's fast, it's kinetic. And
you can air dash, you can double jump.
Exactly.
Like, it's basic tenets of it shouldn't be old school gaming. I feel like Astrobot reminded people how much they love 3D platformers, and obviously it's not like there's been a dearth of them across the last few years, but they're not in the fore as much as like an FPS or whatever. And something like this is just such a breath of fresh air because it reminds you so much of how much we miss these genres or these mechanics.
I think, what's impressive to me is that 7 or 8 hours in, like we said, it's an asynchronous approach to multiplayer. Player one will, depending on the level, have a different power set to player two. And I think what's been impressive so far is that even though there have been moments where I've been playing and I've thought, I kind of wish I was doing what the other person was doing, there are no bad powers. I've found it never feels like you're lumped with one that is less enjoyable than what the other person's got. True. Because I think that can kill a game like this where you just think like, I'm missing out. I want to do that cool thing and I'm here playing support. The way that they balance them, at least so far, again, about 7 hours in, I've never really had that feeling. Every time someone else has a cool moment where they're driving a vehicle, you'll get one a few levels later and you'll kind of swap it around. So it all balances out in that way. And I think they've managed to just balance that pretty perfectly where no matter what you're doing, no matter which role you're occupying, because you don't know in advance, you just pick one of the characters and you get whatever you're given. Like, they've all been really satisfying so far.
One thing I wanted to say is, like, this is maybe like a bit cheesy, but I feel like, people who play enough video games, like obviously we do, we've grown up playing so many different things. A lot of people watching, listening to me talking right now will know all these different tenets of different genres over the years. I feel like Faraz and Hazelight tap into that in a way that is like, if gaming is a conversation, he's speaking it directly. And it's like, because that bit at the very beginning, like you said, with the power sets, it's the first time you go to the sci-fi city, and it's like one character, the sci-fi character, gets like a blade, and both of you get grapple hooks, but she's got like a blade so you can do melee combos. The other person gets telekinesis power, so you're ripping stuff off the walls and throwing it at enemies. And then the game's like, hey, just do some third-person melee stuff for a bit. Yeah. But it's almost like you're tapping into like, okay, you kind of know what these powers are. You've probably wielded a blade before, and you've probably thrown something at an enemy before. So it's all very immediate. And I remember I was playing through bits of it with my wife, and she was saying like, it does feel, that was just her word for it, was immediate. And I just really love that. Like, there is a quality to this. And I know right as we're recording this, Hazelight are doing like a whole advertising campaign for like, not everyone has a friend in real life, and here's a friend in a box so you can play. But then they're also pushing their Discord, and they're trying to make you play through with someone else. To me, there's something so genuine about that, where it's like, if you can sit down and play through this with someone in person, that's awesome, whether it's like a partner, a relative, anyone at all. And I really love the quote-unquote risk of leading with that, because so many studios and publishers and marketing companies, departments, wouldn't even touch that with a barge pole. Yeah, wouldn't be like, we can't hinge the game on playing with someone. They'll not buy it, which is why the whole cross-platform PlayStation people can play with Xbox people and everything. I love the whole approach to it.
Yeah, it's really consumer friendly in that way, isn't it? Not just with obviously the local co-op, but the ability to game share, the way that they're getting people involved, to find someone to play with, because it is just such a joy to have that experience with someone, whether it's someone you know or whether it's a stranger. Like, there's one early level where both characters get the opportunity to shapeshift into two different sort of creatures each. Yes. And it, like, just discovering that for the first time, getting used to what each of these different shape-shifted forms can do and how they work together. Like, finding that stuff out and just messing around is as fun as the platforming when you're working together and firing off all of those abilities. But you're absolutely right, that immediacy is part of its charm, but similar to It Takes Two, I like that it is challenging as well. Like, I've died more than I've died in recent action games in it. And yeah, part of that is, down to my partner's fault. If you're watching the video version of this, you'll see that one side of the screen is a little bit behind the other side, but a lot of it is just because they're well designed in that way through trial and error, but fun trial and error, because even, again, going back to that word immediacy, even when you mess up, you're right back in the action. You know why you've gone wrong. You know why it's your fault. Let's try it again.
It doesn't feel punishing at all. Like, as long as you don't both die, you don't go back to the last checkpoint. But even then, they're really forgiving with the checkpoints. Like if you're mistiming a jump or whatever, I go back to that Willy Wonka style thing where it's like, I wonder what he's got for me next. Yeah, and it's like, and he's got either a new gimmick, a new level idea, shifting perspective. So you're going from third person shooting to platforming to driving to turret sequences. Like, it's every game you've played and then delivered in the most immediate way.
Tailford.
I read his mind.
The second note I have written down in my notes is use of perspectives, because that is magic. I want to talk about like the actual presentation of that stuff, because that's beautiful. Obviously, it's split screen, and if you're playing the game, you're almost certainly just looking at your side of the screen, not the other one. But what I love about it is if you just look at the screen as a whole, if you look at both sides, yeah, it has those moments where you'll be playing in a 3D space while whoever you're playing with will essentially in certain areas maybe be playing in a 2D platformer, right? And the way that's presented on the main screen is magic, because from their perspective, it is 2D. From your perspective, you're seeing them in your world doing all of that stuff in a fully realized 3D space. And that's kind of like provided some of the most jaw-dropping moments for me. Again, there's a level early on where it kind of does a fez, where you're working on different planes of the 3D space. So if you're, imagine you've got a cube, you're on top of the cube, your partner's running along the side of the cube, right? And both of you have those different perspectives, but you're seeing each other kind of flip over one another,
because
going
they shift
from
gravity as well.
Yeah,
so like
exactly.
someone will jump to them down, but it'll go past you left to right. Like it's really cool.
That stuff does just feel like magic, and
that's the stuff where I'm
keeps
like,
it inventive. When even though they're playing with a platforming and puzzle framework that, like you said, you have experienced before, but you've not experienced it necessarily like this.
That's the stuff that I'm like, Haters Light as a dev need their flowers. Like we've given them to them at different points over the years. Like I feel like Brothers was the most championed game initially of like the narrative side of it and whatever. A Way Out I loved, but I get that didn't hit with everybody. And then obviously Takes-Two blew up. But the sheer confidence in a variety of mechanics that are here, like you'll get a studio over the in the industry that specialize in one thing, like a melee model or a first-person shooter model or whatever it is, and that's great. But Haters Light are like, we can do everything, and we'll actually we'll just do it in quick succession. And it'll feel great because we're pulling from all these different genres and we have our own expertise and everything. But yeah, that bit that you were mentioning about the way the gravity shifts and everything, one of the early set pieces that blew me away, where I was like, you guys are doing a Naughty Dog, is like the highway chase that you do in the Cyberpunk city. It's right at the beginning, but you're going from like, vehicle to vehicle to vehicle, but on different planes of gravity. And then you're jumping over each other and like opening a part of the environment for the next person. And I was like, this is like Uncharted 4's chase scene, but with 2 players and reversed gravity and polarity every sort of 2 seconds. And I was like, this on a technical coding level is insane.
It's technically so impressive. I don't know how it's been for you. I've been playing the PS5 Pro version, but
it's been solid, yeah.
Despite how big the scale gets, and it can get absolutely huge, like you said, you've got those big action moments where it feels like you're playing an Uncharted. For me, it's kept like a rock solid 60 frames per second for both sides of the screen. It's never dipped, and it has gotten massive in certain missions. I kind of want to go back to what you said there about like, I don't know, just the idea that everything's stuffed in here. What I love is that, you've got the 2 different genres that you're working with, sci-fi and fantasy. I don't know if you've encountered many of these, but a lot of my favorite areas have been these things called side stories.
I haven't got that yet.
So as you're playing through the regular level, you'll be able to essentially get a bonus level within it that is optional. And it's kind of like when you jump on the little circles in Crash Bandicoot and then you get taken off to a different part of it. But these will, again, jump into a different side story. In the narrative, it's kind of like their unfinished ideas, stuff that they were just kind of like floating around that were quite cool, but they didn't have a proper beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
And those are some of the most inventive ones because they can just go hog wild. Like there are ones where you're running across kind of God of War 3 style, but without the extreme violence. You're running across the hands and the limbs of giants as they take you around this massive play space. You're sometimes, what would you call it? Paragliding through a bustling city.
Okay, like a wingsuit
it's all wingsuited, so you get all of these different ones. And those are the ones that I've adored because a lot of them encourage you to kind of meander and lollygag. You kind of get to go into a world. I was in one last night where it was a kind of like a witchy market and you got to like, interact with the environment for reasons that aren't even important to the overall level, but you get a magic wand where you can turn NPCs into frogs. You can mix potions that have various effects. It might turn your head into a trumpet that you can play. Just like little silly things like that. Like, you can't ignore.
Is there a button to play the? Is there a button to?
Oh
go,
yeah, there is.
Oh.
Yeah. Press R2, play the trumpet.
I will.
And there are some other ones that I kind of don't want to spoil because they are just so again, imaginative and fun to get into. But they serve, I think, as like, sometimes they do have that challenge in terms of the platforming and puzzle stuff, but a lot of them are just kind of bite-sized. Here's a load of fun ideas, and we can stop for a little bit and mess around with them. And I think, yeah, that balance between just having fun and actually giving you a bit of a challenge, the side stories manage to thread those things quite well, and give you a bit more variety outside of just the two stories that you're otherwise occupying. Those are really impressive. Yeah.
In It Takes Two, you would get like those little conduits that you could stand on or whatever, and it would become more of a versus game. Like then that was riffing on something like a Punch Out or whatever. I do like that, even though you're getting this relentless faucet of ideas in the main thread, you can like, it's just Faraz or the rest of the team going like, we actually have even more stuff for you. And even though that thing isn't fully fleshed out, we can give you a version of it so far. Every time you're describing this, and I love talking about this game. Like, we're not sponsored whatsoever, but I absolutely love this thing. And it's one of those things where when you talk about it with someone and you talk about the joy of what's in there, I just want to like hold it up and be like, this is gaming.
Yeah.
This is why it's so good. And there are so many studios and so many publishers and developers and whatever that are railroaded into giving you the most cynical products possible. Whereas there's a genuine nature to this that is, and it's coupled with the goddamn witchcraft that is doing this with EA's paycheck. Like, Joseph Fares is a charming man, but I have no idea how he's able to do this when EA are tightening the purse strings everywhere else. But you get a game that is just, I don't know, with an indie soul and a AAA budget and just like Faraz and Hazelight doing everything.
Yeah.
And no one is going like, but can you put microtransactions in it? Like every interview that Faraz does, he talks about how they'll never do that stuff. And I'm like, sick, we need so much more of this.
And I think what's beautiful about that is because I wonder if Faraz and the team like kind of know how lucky they are, because like you said there, with something like this and It Takes Two, it feels like every idea they've ever had is in Split Fiction. It feels like they've left nothing kind of on the cutting room floor. I'm almost certain they will have, but
I
it's
thought
like,
that about It Takes Two anyway, though.
Yeah,
and it's like they still keep going.
Yeah, it's like every one you think you surely can't have more. It feels like you put your everything into this project, and then 3 years later they give you another one that's even more refined and somehow even more imaginative. So I want to talk about the story a little bit.
Yeah.
If you've got nothing else to add. Or
No, I'm just going to leap in and freak out at any gap.
Come on then. So the story, I like and both have, it's not issues with, but it's definitely, I don't know, it's complicated. So the idea or the general thrust of the game, like I said, you control these two writers who go to a publishing house who tell them, hey, your story's been accepted, we want to publish it, we want to make you become a proper writer. When everyone arrives, though, they end up in this machine where they live out their stories. And it turns out, maybe in classic fashion, that you've got these two opposite approaches to art. You've got the writers who bring their ideas, and then you've got the businessmen at the top and the executives who want to siphon those ideas and make as much money off them as possible. And the machine you're in is essentially siphoning everyone's ideas. And
it's the EA machine.
It's stealing their creativity, it's stealing their imagination. And thematically, I think that's absolutely spot on.
It's so
this
funny.
to come out now in an era where literally later on in this podcast, we're going to talk about AI art and stuff. In an era where the line between art and commerce is in the midst of being obliterated by so many video game studios, so many movie studios, so many different companies across the world. It's great to have a little story like this within the EA structure, like you mentioned, that's kind of trying to push back against that in a little way and say, like, there's a reason why a lot of people, I think, especially in the UK, refer to like the arts as like Mickey Mouse subjects. Like, why are you, going into the arts when you could be doing a trade, you could be doing this, you could be doing something that matters. Like overlooking the fact that even on their terms, entertainment industry brings in so much money to the economy. Like it makes like gaming as a whole on its own is so profitable in many, many ways, right?
Possibly.
So it's kind of like that strange position we're in now where I think obviously we know that, and you get a lot of executives who are like, telling their own employees, hey, we want you to do a load of art for us so then we can sack you and feed it into our own in-house AI algorithm to then, use that art to make something else that we can sell on without you. Having all of those themes in this game, amongst a lot of others, like that really stood out to me as being a highlight of the story so far. I won't obviously spoil anything or where that goes, but I know you're quite early doors. How are you finding it?
I
so
love
far?
how cartoonish the whole thing is, and I love that. Yeah, they both writers get drawn into the same like consciousness bubble. That's why all their ideas start crossing over, and they have to experience their stories. But I don't. 5 people listening to me will have played Eat Lead: The Return of Matt Hazard.
Okay.
But that was a game about similar, exact same setup, where like an action game hero was suddenly aware of the story he was in, and then you could hear the executives in the real world talking about him, and bits of that happen in this. It also reminded me of like The Evil Within, with like a crossover consciousnesses and ideas manifesting and stuff. But I mean, it's all handled quite cartoonishly. Like, yeah, you can pull out the thematics and give them weight, and we can talk about what it means to make this game in the industry in the current era, which I love. But it's all handled very like, this is the concept we have, let's get it out the way. It's like a 2-minute cutscene, if that, or 2 to 5 minute cutscene. Not in a discardant way, but just in a we know why you're here kind of way. And like, it's for the mini games, it's for the gameplay. At least to me, it's for everything other than the story. Like, and it's been interesting. I do think Split Fiction is written better than It Takes Two so far, but so far as well, Split Fiction isn't going for anywhere near as weighty material as
That's interesting.
right at the beginning. Anyway,
Yeah,
like It Takes Two was like a divorced couple and who's going to stick around for the kid, and like, should they get back together? Is it actually okay if people fall away from each other but still look after the kid or whatever? And then for me, the way the story goes in It Takes Two didn't pay any of that off whatsoever. So there's always that thing of like transplanting certain amounts of weight onto thematics. But Split Fiction, like, yeah, you can pull everything out that you just said. It's totally in there. But I took it as quite a cartoonish. How do we get you into these levels as fast as possible?
I'd be interested to see what you think as you go, because I wondered how much it was going to come into play, and it seems like it comes into play a lot. Like, all of the conversations between the characters are about like what art means to them, then being exploited by like this wider thing. Like, it is quite story heavy, way more than I was expecting.
Because they can hear the corporate leader guy talking about them as well.
But then it like leads into the other themes, like, that they're both obviously science fiction, fantasy. One writer is pretty much of the train of thought that like it is a job, it is labor. She's not putting too much of herself into her stories. She's using it to get some money. And the other one kind of comes at it from the perspective of, oh, these are very personal stories to me. And then as the game goes on, it kind of drives home the point of, even if you're creating, you're writing, you're making a game purely for a job, purely to get by, like any art you create, even these videos which really, really sort of bend the definition of art, you do leave some of yourself in there.
Yeah,
like,
exactly,
it can't completely be devoid of like that humanity and all of that stuff. Like, the commentary like on writing itself, I think is great. And yeah, I like it a bit more than It Takes Two, even though that has a more maybe widespread message. Like you said, I think a lot of people can relate to like the family dynamics in there. I think there is a lot of like surprisingly heavy stuff presented in a fun and cartoonish way, like you said, in Split Fiction.
I was going to say, Faraz has a really twisted sense of humor. Like, is there anything in Split Fiction so far that would rival the elephant scene from It Takes Two?
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
I think so. There is one. I'm trying not to spoil it. We might end up putting footage in the video version of this. It's very, very early on. It's one of the side stories. I know Ewan are doing a gameplay video to launch later on this week, and I think you'll get to it there. But it's one side story that has a really funny setup and ends with a really funny punchline.
If it landed, that's cool, because the thing with the elephant scene in It Takes Two, if people don't know, is like you're playing as miniaturized versions of a kid's parents. You come across the kid's favorite toy, and you have to sort of butcher it and kill it to get through the level or whatever. But it begs for its life, and it gets really dark.
Yeah.
And it is that strand of comedy, the juxtaposition of just pushing it so much that it's supposed to come out the other end as hilarious, but to a lot of people it was just really dragged out and awkward. And I know Faraz has been asked about that over the years and said that it was obviously meant to be a comedic scene. It clearly is in context, but it's just he pushes it so much in that scene.
It's very similar to that. It doesn't quite have the same edge to it, but it's played in a similar way where you're supposed to be a little bit shocked by what happens, and that happens a couple of times through it. But yeah, it definitely has that sort of
It reminds the thing is,
edge.
I don't know if he's going for a sort of old school fairy tale kind of tone where like you would read about, you know, like different fairy tales where it's like, oh, the two kids are on an adventure and then they come across the monster and one of them gets eaten. They just get eaten. And then the next person has to try and survive and whatever. And there's always like that weird edge to old school fairy tales. And I don't know if that's what he's doing. It's like, no, there are consequences in this world. It's not, you know, and I just, as he becomes more of an auteur and becomes more of like a known quantity and gets talked about as this like, you know, authored voice, then I think those tenets are going to come through more. Like, what is a Joseph Fares game? What's that written like? What does it feel like?
I think so. And listen, don't get me wrong. I'm a 30-year-old man playing this game and loving every second of it. But it is fundamentally, I think, for the younger audience, like you said, with the way it has these deeper themes, but it has the way the characters are written, especially, I think, is to not alienate anyone who is playing this as their first video game or whatever. But I think it has that all ages appeal. You know, like the classic animations that you probably still watch as an adult, or the classic TV shows that you have, where it just works on both levels. It works if you're an adult coming to it looking for that extra depth or that kind of edgier humor, but then it just works as a straight up fantasy story if you're younger and you're like enjoying the fact that these worlds are melding and they need to get out, and you know the personal histories that each person has.
Even that level of writing is like was used to just be a thing that Pixar owned. It was, oh, they're writing something for the kids that the parents get more out of or the older people get more out of. Even being able to have that much control of your script so it works for those different, you know, diametrically opposed age groups is even that is awesome in itself. Like,
the only thing I'm not loving in terms of the writing and the gameplay is the way the characters are written, especially earlier on. They are so stereotypical in terms of how they relate to their genre. Like you got a brooding, introspective, hard ass who writes science fiction and, like I said, doesn't really think of art or isn't thinking of it as like being a personal thing. You know, very reserved, not going to be emotional. Then on the other end, you've got someone who is kind of really itsy ditzy and
she's plucky she's
plucky, she's quirky. She doesn't understand the fact that the other character has bills to pay and a mortgage. She writes about cats and fantasy and like everything's cool, and obviously
the cozy genre.
The cozy genre, and like obviously there are complications to both their characters as the story goes on, but initially it's a bit broad in that sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, even the depiction of sci-fi and fantasy, it's like the version of sci-fi is big floating cars and big tall skyscrapers, and it's at night because of course it is. And then fantasy stuff is big ogres and villages and twee stuff and ale and like ale houses and everything. So I think, at least at the beginning, I'm nowhere near as far as you. They're casting such a wide net at the beginning to be like, let's bring this genre all the way back to its foundations and write a foundational character for each one.
Yeah.
And then I guess go from there. But yeah, It Takes Two, I thought, really overstayed its welcome in that regard in regards to the writing, because it just ended up repeating the same plot beats over and over again. So I hope this thing lands, but I'm not there for the story. That's icing on the cake.
Right.
The cake itself is phenomenal. If they can pull off, make me really feel and I'll care, then sick, but I'm there for the gameplay.
I think that's fair. You know, you can just ignore it if you want. Because they draw so much attention to it and because there are a whole load of cutscenes and a lot of dialogue between the two characters.
Pretty high budget game overall. Like the whole thing
100%.
is dripping in costs, like effective production. Like there's a lot of money gone into every inch of it.
Looks lush as well. Like every time that there is a cutscene and you do get the close-ups of the characters, obviously it's not going to be, you know, Naughty Dog level graphics, but it looks good.
It's stylized, I mean, it's not. They're not going for like real life rendering, but it totally works. It's like a cohesive art style that definitely works.
Big time.
Yeah, man.
I'm looking forward to it, Scott. I mean, I'm looking forward to playing more.